So what we're going to do today is, we had a book tour when this book came out. It was a virtual book tour, and various people would, in different places, would arrange for 4 or 5 or 6 people to be present at the same time. And we basically did the structure we're going to do today, which was a very brief introduction to something about the book, and then an experience of the book. So, so let's begin, and remind me if we forget something we're doing.
Sure.
So we're just going to read, the two of us are going to read from the overview. Why another book on research and writing? The short answer, the approach presented here is not addressed well elsewhere. Most texts on research lay out the step-by-step decisions, starting with identification of the problem, or they review the theories and methods involved in various kinds of research. Texts on writing provide guidance and exercises to improve your writing skills. In contrast, hi Carol, this book presents frameworks and tools to help you become more engaged in research and writing.
Right there.
So suppose you have a specific question or a general issue that seems worth investigating. Now reflect on your level of engagement with the research. Is it important to you personally? And does the inquiry really flow from your own aspirations, as against being directed to meet the expectations of others, such as funders, advisors, or trendsetters in the field? So will the research help you to take action to change your own work, life, or wider social arrangements? And will it help you to build relationships with others in such action, in pursuing the inquiry effectively, and in communicating the outcomes?
If you've answered yes in each instance, that's good to hear, given that these questions are not emphasized in other research and writing texts. If you've answered no, or maybe not to any of the questions, consider this analogy. For a car engine to move the wheels, the gears need to be engaged with each other. Similarly, for your research and writing to move along well, you need to align your questions and ideas, your aspirations, your ability to take or influence action, and your relationships with other people. These concepts can be shortened to head, heart, hands, and human connections. The frameworks and tools in this book can help you to bring these 4 H's into alignment. That is what we mean by engagement, and by inviting readers to take yourself seriously. And that's expressed in this graphic. There's the gears and the 4 aspects of the book. So, we're just going to indicate, you're not supposed to read this all this writing, but just indicate a few of the things that the book does. And one of it has this framework of 10 phases of research and engagement. And so from the overall vision to taking stock at the end. So each of these phases has a lot of tools. Welcome, Ross. A lot of tools that are also introduced in the book. Let's see what the next slide is. Oh, we also have another framework, and this is the framework for this action research course I was mentioning, Maureen. And again, it's complicated, but one of the things I might point out is there's these reflection and dialogue epicycles. So in a lot of action research, it's like research. You're trying to find the answers to the question, and then you make a new cycle as you learn the answers the first time. But there's a lot more time for reflecting and for dialogue in this book. So when I say there are tools, there are like 70 or so tools and processes in the book, and this is just the beginning of the list. They're actually presented alphabetically at some point in the book. So there are 2 main frameworks. There is a 3rd framework, and there are these tools. But one of the overall spirits of the book, which is also of our teaching, is this. I call this the mandala. There are like 6 aspects here, and that students are working on, or participants in any process, and they don't always pull in the same direction. So. Students, for example, often say, how do I get a good grade, or what exactly do you expect? And I say, fine to ask me that question. Negotiate the power and standard, that's fine, but at the same time build horizontal connections. But at the same time, just try it, be here now. Don't always expect that I'm going to be able to prove to you that this will be valuable before you've even done it. but that very process often brings up emotions. It's maybe not the way you like to learn, or maybe not the way you used to learn. But the end is to develop autonomy, not in the sense of I'll do my own thing, but in the sense of not thinking that the process of doing research or the process of learning is one in which you've just got to take directions or you've got to block yourself off from other directions. Autonomy is like taking things in, moving them through your system and making what you need for yourself. And then explore difference is like explore or embrace diversity of approaches and perspectives. So that spirit underlies the book as well. Is there anything more, John? No. So basically what we said before you came is what we're going to do today, after that brief introduction, is to take you through an experience which uses some of the tools in the book. And it's this 5-phase format, and there are 5 parts to it. And that's what we did in the spring when we had a virtual book tour. People got together, people in different places arranged to collect a group of 5 people by Skype, and then we joined at whatever time they arranged, and we took them through a brief introduction and then this experience. So we're going to take you through that today. Okay? So the general topic of this next bit less than an hour is how we, learning from each other, how we go about bringing new tools and processes into our teaching. Is that the way we said it, Jeremy? How we go about learning something, deciding to bring it in, learning from, trying it out, improving it, and so on. And I'm sure that we collectively in this room have a lot of insight to share about that. And the way we would do it is, the first step is for people to do some free writing on this very issue. So that's why we brought some paper and pen. So to collect your own, to bring your own thoughts, because we know you already have knowledge, but you bring it to the surface. Probably you're thinking about the meeting you just came from, although actually I need a piece of paper too. So what is guided free writing is a process in which you start it's guided, so there's a prompt. So the issue is, the prompt here is, what are my thoughts when I'm confronted with having to talk about how I bring new tools and processes into my teaching. The free writing is you start writing and you keep writing without taking a pen off the paper, even if what you're writing is, I don't have anything to write. And after a few minutes, you usually find something does come up beside, this is a ridiculous thing to be doing at this time of day. And that then, bringing that to the surface then fuels the discussion that we're going to have.
Can you clarify the prompt?
The prompt is,
It was kind
here's a
of,
book with
yeah.
a lot of new tools and processes. So if you buy the book, you'll be able to look through and say, I already do this. Oh, that's interesting. So you might want to integrate those tools and some of them into your teaching. But how does that happen? When do you try out an innovation? So the prompt would be just for you to think about when you've made change, when you've brought new tools and processes into your teaching. What's made it happen? What are your thoughts about that? What are your thoughts about that? What's your experiences? What are your feelings? And because we're not doing this online, if you need me to come and give you a bit of coaching, just grab my attention. But otherwise, I'll do it too. Russ, you look a bit like you need a bit more explanation.
You want to give me more paper so I can...
No.
Are
you going to do it? Good. But you just do it. Okay. You fine. Sure, then we'll just alternate.
Okay, so for the next section, so this is the second part of the 5-phase format. So we do a check-in. So what we do is that everyone will take a turn, and if you just mention maybe mention your name one more time, and then mention something that you're bringing in to the session today. So It doesn't have to be something that you're repeating from what you wrote in the free writing, just something that's on the top of your mind that you're bringing in related to the topic very briefly. No need to give a kind of long reflection on that. So would anybody like to start? First check-in?
I can go.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm Maureen Scully. I'm in the College of Management, and I did some of my pre-writing on our new PhD program. The first cohort has just joined us, and was actually had a mentor to me who asked if I would teach differently. And I had thought a lot about how our PhD program had different content, sort of renegade for what we normally do in business schools, but not so much how I teach a PhD seminar differently. It's a sort of one flavor thing. You know, it's a review of the literature, soberly considered articles, piles of reading, lots of discussion of them. But how would I really teach differently to be consonant with the new principles about how to study and think about business that I was meaning to be teaching them? So I kind of did a little work on that.
So it'll go around the circle which way?
Okay. I'll pass the baton to you.
Okay, I'm Peter Taylor. I was actually thinking about how I have some resistance when people resist trying out new things. I want them to try it out. I mean, I sort of feel it. I don't want them to spend time telling me why it's not going to work for them. I want them to try it out and then see whether it's worked for them. And I'm thinking about, well, it's important to let hear people's voices. So I'm thinking about how to hear voices without letting them simply trump experimenting with new tools.
So Jeremy Szteiter, and one thing I was thinking about just first off was in my own teaching, bringing in new tools that help other people, students for example, collaborate in a way that will start to help me kind of be taken out of the equation a little bit. So ways that tools can be introduced to students in a way that will help them to take charge of their group interactions and not have to depend on me to give them permission to do the things that they want to try to do in their groups.
I'm Carol Smith. I'm in the psychology department, and I also participate in the critical creative thinking program, so I think people so what did I think about? When he gave me the prompt to think about new tools, I thought bringing new tools into my teaching is very tricky, so I'm going to be in the resistance camp of Peter. Partly because I think of a tool not necessarily as a hard little atom that just can be introduced and works. It depends on how it organically fits into all the other things that I'm doing, and so I'm often aware of that. And then I started thinking about a particular example. At the same time, I acknowledged, maybe in deference to you, Peter, that sometimes a new tool can start a whole organic change of triggering this change and this change and this change. So although there's no guarantee the tool works out, you have to actually make multiple adjustments, I would think, in a new tool, or it can backfire on you, it seems to me, or not produce the intended effect. It can also be a kind of concrete mechanism that can trigger you to make a whole host of other changes, but it's tricky.
I'm Camille Martinez. I'm in the Office for Family Development.
Yeah, I get messages from you all the
time. I haven't been in the classroom in a couple years now, but I guess I was writing about an experience that I had when I had taught here and I was doing a methods class, and I had to bring in some new tools because I had made these assumptions that a lot of the skills that I thought the students would already have, because it was an upper level class. But they didn't have them, or a lot of them didn't have them. So I went from teaching sort of the methods of, media studies back to sort of just teaching research methods, period, or, how to run the library and use the different databases and all that. So I was just thinking about that, and then, and then I switched subjects in the middle of it and went on to like the syllabus and how each semester when you start building anew and how excited you are about that. So sort of two different aspects.
Russell Shute in sociology, I guess I can relate to everything that's been said. I'm going to place myself in the Carroll camp together in being one of those people that Peter doesn't like because they resist innovation, because my example has to do with innovating in our Foundations of Applied Sociology course, which is a course that I haven't been teaching very often. Usually our GPD teaches it, which I used to be, but anyway. And I used to teach it as a kind of content course about the history of the discipline, so on. But when my back was turned, our graduate committee decided that they would start projects in this Foundations class that would be carried forward into our methods courses. And I like to teach our methods courses like Camille does with students who are kind of getting the training that they need to do what they have to do. And so if you want students to work on a project, you start teaching them methods, and that's not really what Foundations is about. And so I never quite got how these things were supposed to, you know, kind of occur on a sequence and so on. See, that's when you know you've got problems with somebody, is when they like sequence but anyway, this wonderful guy walked into my office one day and asked, before the semester started, and asked me if I had worked with him to evaluate a program that he directed called Teen Empowerment. And I thought, well, gee, you know, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, so maybe this would work out. And anyway, it ended up that I did work out a plan for a class project with this community-based violence prevention program, and got the students, you know, had the people from the program come and talk to the graduate students, and, you know, had them work out interview schedules and observation protocols, and they went out into these sites and had a really wonderful time and really learned a lot about the program, and also you know, I had an experience of really grappling with a community problem that, you know, they could all relate to as, you know, up and coming sociologists and so on. And they did wonderful work, and we had these wonderful end of semester presentations that some of the program people attended, and then just this spring in one of the community event days on campus, thanks to the chancellor, we had a public presentation with the students and a bunch of people from Teen Empowerment, and it was really fantastic. And then the director and I also went out and got another foundation grant to actually do a bigger study, which I'm still involved in. But you know, and it was just a wonderful experience. I should change my mind, but I'm still having trouble with the, you know, except I think there's something to just kind of jumping in and doing stuff without having a, quote, proper foundation. I would have liked to have been the instructor for their subsequent first graduate course in research methods, kind of build on that and see how that went with that, you know, somewhat less structured experience, but then tying that into the formal techniques and, you know, methods that they needed to study more.
So that's the third phase. Russ has already made the transition. So the check-in puts things out on the table. The third phase, we explore them further. And so the method we use is to take turns, and these cards are our way of taking turns. So basically, the third phase is up there. It's very small text, but it says dialogue process. So even though it's called a dialogue process, the main thing you do in the dialogue process is listen to other people. But if you think you want to take a turn, even when someone's talking, you lean across and you take the card, and then you can listen well, because you know you'll you get a turn, so you don't have to worry about. So that's the
You
idea
don't
of
have to
cards.
raise your hand.
Yeah, and you don't have to like alert anyone to take to be writing down who's going to talk next. With a larger group, you probably do need something like that. But so when your turn comes up, maybe the conversation's moved on, and what you wanted to say you don't need to say anymore. So you pass, you put the card back, and that would let the next person know. Or maybe you've got something you can add, even if it wasn't the thing you have to say. The general spirit is not so much asserting things we already know, but exploring things that we are not quite sure of. And I feel like Russ's contribution was a very good start to that, saying, this is what I like, but then I had this experience, and my hands are sort of gesturing the way I felt what Russ had to say. And it's okay if there's, I should be keeping the card because I'm still speaking. It's okay if there's silence too, because we're also not just listening to other people, but listening to ourselves. And we'll do that until we've got about 8 minutes to go. Then we'll gather our thoughts. The fourth phase is to gather your thoughts for yourself, and the last phase is to do a go around. Camille said you have to go before the end. Anyway, so I'm going to put the card down and we can start.
I would actually just like to ask a question. I won't ask you if that's permissible. I'll just assume that that's permissible. So, Russ, I had a question for you as I was reflecting on what you were saying. Was that project experience in your foundations course that was not the way you had planned it, but then it unfolded differently?
No.
Oh, he's not allowed to do that.
There is a guideline. So questions in dialogue don't have to be answered straight away. The person can choose to answer when their turn comes up.
Right.
So in a way, although you looked at Russ, it's a question you're offering the question for all of us, so we can all think about the question, even though it was stimulated by Russ. And
I mean, I'm not sure to what extent dialogue is different from, I know it has a structure, and normally I would just like ask people questions.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different from normal, but
Yeah,
it's fine.
I know.
And because I'd already had a card, so Russ can come back to it. I think you'll see that works. So just the question again that you said, because I was.
It was just a question of clarification, rather than commenting from my own experience. I just wanted to know the question, I guess. I was trying to understand, was this an experience where you stumbled on a new tool that you hadn't meant to use, or a whole network of tools, and then found yourself pleased with them? I was trying to sort out some of the lessons you took from the example.
So now you finished. Okay.
Now I put it back?
Yep.
I don't get another one. Okay.
So if Russ, if Russ wants to answer, he can take a card, and if he wants to just let it sit there, he doesn't have to. So I've got the next card. So I have forgotten what I was going to say. The issue of I said, in the check-in, I said I don't like people who resist, but I actually should have said I don't like the feeling of I like the feeling better when people say, okay, try some new tool, and so it does make me wonder how to I said before, how to explore people's what the situation is. I understand classroom teachers are often not going to try out something new, because even though, I have a lot of classroom teachers in my current biology and society course, and they're really interested in something called problem-based learning, but they've also got MCAS, and they just don't know where there's going to be any space to try something new. So there's real constraints on people's lives that are really obvious for the teacher, but there are real constraints for other people. So it was probably right that people pushed back against my idea that people resist, because there's usually rationality when people aren't what I'm calling resisting. Maybe I've got to find another word.
So it was interesting for me listening to the other comments. I feel like when I'm teaching undergraduates here at UMass, I'm very engaged with how to meet them where they are, what tools do they have, what do they need, what would be a very meaningful project that helps them make a difference in the world while learning the content, learning it kind of inductively through doing something or thinking about something. And I'm all on fire about that sort of thing. And yet it's funny, I have this disconnect when I'm thinking about doctoral education. It's sort of like, buck up, you're here to become a scholar. I'm not going to hold your hand. That seems silly, especially if I'm trying to teach them similarly to engage with social justice and the world and be future business school teachers of a different kind that I feel the world needs. So why should I feed them the same vanilla stuff? I actually haven't taught a doctoral seminar since the 90s, so I'm rebooting scripts from 1992 in the classroom 20 years later. Anyway, it's interesting for me to be all about my doctoral students, but hearing people speak to the passions for undergraduate and master's teaching that usually animate my days.
I just had to comment that I was a doctoral student when I was teaching this class, and was still, in my program, and hadn't taught here before. So it was, so that was part of it. And what I didn't, and I started to write on here too, is that a lot of, obviously a lot of how you teach is, are sort of your assumptions and that experience that you had in at that moment. But then you end up, once you realize like they're not working, this is the moment of innovation, because sometimes you have to do it. This was sort of, I had already built the syllabus, I had already planned out every week, so I had to backtrack, and I still wanted to get to a certain point, but I had to bring in some things that I wasn't expecting to. But those end up also creating a lot of really interesting conversations about that you weren't expecting to have. So the class is always, I don't know, maybe it's sort of like that.
So I'm next. When we brought this book out, I was also, about that time, noticed that Russ had a new book or a new edition of his book on research methods, and thought, this is so different. I should really know more about what you do in a standard course, and what you do when you set it out with a sequence and so on, rather than this, so many tools, this toolbox to dip into. So there's definitely a tension there for me. But one of the things I've noticed, in part in the creative thinking program, we have students from so many different fields. We can't do foundations, so we can't do the foundations in the sense of knowing that we're creating a scholar in this discipline. So it's both a constraint and a freedom. But I've also noticed that students who come into some of my classes, they tell me at the end that they were in shock at the beginning, but at least they stayed in, they didn't drop out. But they say, why didn't we have a course like this in our program? So it's not like they're throwing away their quantitative methods courses, but there was something about the kind of courses that build on the tools in here that allow them to take themselves seriously, to work out why the project's important to them, that seems to be missing from the courses where people are insisting that they get through these topics. And there was one course I did in the Graduate Consortium of Women's Studies, so it's got people from all over the Boston area. And I think after the very first week of the first time we did it, a doctoral student from a university that shall be unnamed said, "This is exactly the kind of course we should have had. This course allows me to investigate what I'm really interested in. You know, why didn't we have this course in our program?" I'm thinking, she's got to the dissertation stage and she never got a course that allowed her to, that she would call, allows me to study what I'm really interested in. So there's obviously some tension there that where this kind of book or these courses based on this book are pulling in one direction that isn't well enough developed in the standard courses. So it'd be interesting to see whether I could get a more open course included in the syllabus of a more standard program, and then what would happen. You know, doing a course with the Graduate Consortium of Women's Studies is kind of cheating, because they ask for interdisciplinary innovative courses, and the students who do it are the self-selected students, and it's an extra and it doesn't count for anything and so on.
I will, I don't know if I'm allowed to answer Carol's question. I'll talk about it.
You are.
Okay. You know, the basic issue that I was confronting was doing something basically that I've done many times before in graduate methods courses, but in a different course context, and without having the kind of systematic preparation of, you know, in terms of concepts and tools and so on that go into a standard methods course. And again, just having students kind of jump in to get a feeling and experience with what doing applied sociology can be like. And that's what made it somewhat uncomfortable for me. You know, just conceptually, there wasn't anything that I was, you know, I like doing that kind of thing. Again, I've done it multiple times before, but it was just a question of you know, how structured and systematic and sequenced you should be, as opposed to essentially kind of experientially based and you know, in what you have students do, and more kind of group oriented, and you get together and work this out and so on, and kind of letting the chips fall more where they may, and you know, and then kind of building on that. And it's you know, I'm usually much more methodical. Use the word in a different way in teaching, and you know, but the underlying dilemma is this issue that is just huge in education now, about the extent to which students should kind of engage at their own level and work in groups, and you know, be in charge of their own learning, and the instructor is a guide versus you know, the knowledgeable authority who lays out steps A, B, and C and marches them down to their F. Or no, I mean marches them through those steps. And you know, it is a broader issue of how people learn best, and the extent to which, you know, kind of enthusiasm and just engagement is really, you know, something that you need to maximize before you can expect, you know, progress and substantive learning. And I still struggle with thinking about how to do that, right? You know, how to optimize.
So I was just thinking about some of the things that can inspire me to use new tools and think about how to bring new practices into my teaching and other work. And I really found that one of the ways that I do that is by being a participant in other people's workshops and seminars and talks and things like that. So I really like to see tools by example and experience them without maybe some of the responsibility right away of having to facilitate or do more. So I've tried to make a little bit more of an effort to notice, especially things on campus, for example, when different kind of opportunities come up that I might attend and participate in that way. So one of the things I found is that a number of those kinds of things they're still talks and they're still fairly lecture based. So I come and I learn something about some topic or work that someone's done, and that's great as well. But I'm having trouble sometimes thinking, is there a tool here I should be seeing or can be taking away, or am I just here really just to learn about the topic and make sense of it for my own? So I was thinking that maybe one of the tools I wish I had was a tool to enter a lecture and then try to make meaning of it for myself as a teacher. So am I noticing tools or processes that the facilitator is using, or am I missing that because I'm just seeing it as a lecture? So just thinking about what can I do to enter those experiences and make the most out of them, even when they're not the participatory and process-oriented kinds of things that I might more naturally take something from. So I'm not sure if that tool is in this book, but think about that more.
What Jeremy said about participating in other people's activities, I was actually thinking about as soon as Carol and Russ said they're in the resistors camp. I thought, out of all the people on campus, they actually have come to this thing, so they're going to participate in other people's activities. Whether they're won over is another thing, but I do appreciate when people are interested enough to come and participate, and I don't have a completely thick skin, but I have a thick enough skin and it doesn't work perfectly. It's okay. I write some notes, think about how I do it differently the next time, and then move on. I was thinking about how I first, I use problem-based learning a lot in graduate education now, but the very first time I did something, I didn't even know that term then. My first full-time teaching job, I was in New York. I looked out the window of the classroom, and there were I was on the second floor down on the street. 3 of my students were getting in a car and going off somewhere. And I thought, I think I've lost them. They're not in the class today. And I talked to one of them, and he said, it was a statistics course. And he said, well, you gave, at this place you promoted your courses in an orientation at the beginning, and I gave some nice, really interesting things that happened with statistical analysis. And they thought that it would all be on the issues. And he said, I didn't expect we'd be doing the work to learn this stuff, I said, well, that's what statistics is. But over that weekend, I created a case, explored a case. So everything for the rest of the semester was methods used around a particular case or a particular problem. I don't think they invented the case, I think I did. And I don't remember how I did that. But so, yeah, so it was like Camille's thing a little bit. The pushback from the students made me make a change. That doesn't say how I've learned all the tools that we include in this book. I have to think about that.
Well, I didn't mean to say I was really in the resistance camp. I actually think that a lot of us are wrestling with different balances that one has to have and go into something with knowledge that you have to understand something well enough and have it fit into a context for it to be effective. So something that you could use very effectively, I might be missing a kind of critical ingredient, or the way I respond or fail to respond may set an entirely different tone. So I was actually just trying to ruminate on that and sort of reflecting on Jeremy about how you actually learn to use new tools. I think there could be a participatory aspect, I think the type of thing that you do that one has to sort of feel how it feels for oneself, but sometimes there can also be an observational aspect. So, and there are some interesting tools that I thought of and I wrote about that have to do tools used in science education, for example, whereby giving a kind of pre-instruction test or devising a little thing that you use at the start that Jim Minstrel does, for example, with his high school physics, which I first learned about. Jim Minstrel came to the campus here and led us through this. I then saw videos of Jim Minstrel in his classroom that got me to be able to envision and think about how to use that in my own classroom situation. And one of the intriguing aspects about it is it allows students to express ideas and for them to learn what their ideas are and for the teacher to learn what their ideas are, but it depends critically on your skill in devising an interesting question to ask, which is no mean feat. It depends critically on the classroom environment. Do you set it up that there's a right answer or a wrong answer, or do you set it up, and it also where you get a chance to express the reasoning underlying your idea. And whether it's effective or not depends critically on what do you follow up with in the classroom, a whole sequence of activities. It's a much more structured kind of thing than what you were thinking about in some of your tools, but so that was one of the ones that I was reflecting on. And that's what I meant when I said there are many supporting things that need to be in place for it to be effective. And it's no mean feat to pull that off. But I've seen people who do it beautifully, and I'd like to learn from them.
I have to be back in my office by 3:30. We'll take this as...
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Here's the shameless comments.
Yeah, thanks. Congratulations.
So I was thinking about Jeremy's comment. I do love to be a participant in a workshop and just see what it feels like, because we're so often leading them, it seems, in our teaching lives. So that is a fun way to learn. So I recently just borrowed something from my son's elementary school where there was a warm-up activity that the principal did with the first parents' night. And your parents are a little nervous, new school. That might actually be a good warm-up exercise for my doctoral class the very next day. I'm not usually so last in, first out. I'm usually really be deliberative. There's like a whole cloth and I'm going to lay out every square of the quilt to make sure I have this ironically spontaneous experiential exercise, at least well in place. Maybe I don't have every square, but I have a place for the square in the quilt. But this time I just tried it, and as a way to get the doctoral students in my class talking about the first article that we had read together, which can itself be an anxious moment, just like parents do in the school. So I tried the same kind of thing, as simple. We talked in 3 groups of 3, so I had a 9-person seminar series, and it worked really well with the first article. So then I thought I'd try it with the second article when we launched into that, and the room wasn't right for it. We already had then warmed up the pot to the point that weighted us down. So it was interesting. It was like wearing a borrowed scarf. It kind of fits with what you're doing, kind of doesn't. But it felt okay, to just experiment and to realize why it worked at the very opening and why it didn't work again, 50 minutes into our time together. And I used to really worry when things like that would go wrong, and now it's like, that was okay. I decided it was, we're more than well warmed up. This constrained us rather than enabled us, so let's move on. And I think they could feel it too, and feel that we were together in that. So there's something about being on the other side and just trying and leaping, you know, and not always like over planning.
This is a question for Russ, who's not here. But it, what we didn't hear in his story was how he got drawn into letting this thing actually happen, you know, against his style. Because, you know, once he got into it, it was, you know, he knows how to do applied research, so he was mostly making sure that research happened. And I guess the cognitive dissonance or whatever it would have been against the way he would teach foundations wasn't in the picture. But in a way, I think it's a more interesting case than the ones I could bring up, because like Jeremy, I like to participate in things, and I've managed to find, you know, there's an organization that I went to twice was then called the International Society for Exploring Teaching Alternatives. And every session was run by one person or two people, whatever, and it was all experiential. So if I wanted to talk about something I had done in my teaching, I didn't get to talk about it. I got to create an activity where everyone experienced it. And I thought that was great. You know, you had an hour and a half rather than 15 minutes. And everyone was really into it. But that's not, the people are self-selected. There were no people from like Ivy League universities there. There were people from so-and-so state, and they were teaching large teaching loads, and they were really into doing their teaching and improving and learning, and it was very inspiring that way, as well as a lot of tools to pick up. But when I think about the Russ's case, it's more challenging. I mean, I am teaching a doctoral course now every couple of years called Epidemiological Thinking and Population Health, and that there is a sequence, and there's a lot of readings, and I'm sort of working on making that one in which the students are also inquiring and connecting with their own interests and all these things that Russ, self-directed student, working in groups and so on, enthused about it. And that's hasn't been so easy. I'm working on it still.
So one of the things I'm reminded of now, thinking about my own teaching, and some of my coursework is online as well, so I'm thinking about those situations too. I kind of think just the issue of trying to bring a new tool or process into the class or the situation, and being clear in the cases where it might be an experiment or where I don't know where it's going. So I kind of found, I feel like maybe I don't do this enough even when I need to, but if I explain, okay, this is a process we're trying out and I don't know if it'll work, or I'd like to have everyone's feedback, somehow it smooths out the anxiety of will this work, and is it going to get us to the place we have to get? So I think fortunately so far I haven't had a lot of people say, well, if you didn't know it was going to work, why did you do it? Why did we have to go through and waste our time? I suppose that might happen in some cases, but usually people, if they know ahead of time it's a process that we're trying, they seem to relax about it a little bit too. And then we, of course that means setting aside time afterwards to say, did the tool get us to the point we have to get to in terms of the material? And then also, we have to spend time talking about the tool and saying, did it work? What do you feel about that? What would it take for us to do that again? In a warm-up situation that you mentioned, that kind of thing. So it's almost like there's time needed to build in space for the tool, and then build in space to think about the tool, and to think about the peripheral kinds of aspects of using it. With the group or with the class or with other people. So like more to think about in this topic.
If I could, I just wanted to ask a question of our session leaders to tell us a little bit more about this intriguing title about taking yourself seriously, and something about bringing the self and one's own passions or standpoint into the teaching and research, or just kind of how you picked this title. If you could tell us a little bit more what's behind that, if you so wish. I've been mulling it over since I arrived and was looking at the cover.
I can talk about that, but I was actually thinking about an earlier issue first, and realizing that there was a period in my teaching when I was at Cornell, and I was teaching a core course in biology and society. We met twice a week for 2 hours, and I would ask two people, we'd go through the class, 2 people to watch the class and come and talk to me afterwards. And we'd do this debriefing, and so they were like participating, like Jeremy was saying it was like there's an experiment going on in here, and these students are drawn into commenting on it and trying to be helpful, and rather than being disgruntled consumers. And I have no idea what got me to do that. So it's kind of like what the overall question about what gets us to try out new tools. Well, that's a particular tool, and then I stopped doing it. Did I stop doing it when I was still at Cornell, or did I stop doing it later, and why? So that's a puzzle for me. The title. So this structure of 10 phases of research and engagement is at the structure of one of the courses we do, the pre-capstone master's course, and I heard myself one day at the beginning of the semester say, look, in this course, it's going to be difficult. I used to always say it's going to be difficult for you. You're going to have trouble. You're going to drop the ball at some point, and then maybe pick it up again. Because that had been my experience of students. And I think I just said, because what's going on in this course, you have to take yourself seriously. No one else is saying this is a project. You know, they have to each invent their own projects, and they have to be important to them. They have to be important enough to make the space to do the research each week, do some work. I forget the exact context in which I said take yourself seriously, but about 18 months later, as a student who had been in that course was finishing the program, she just expressed how that phrase had governed the rest of her learning. And so I started to use it more often. I said, that's what this course is about. And the contrast there was that she just hadn't made the switch before that. She hadn't decided that graduate education was something in which you had to take yourself seriously. And before, the year before I came here, I was something or other visiting chair at Swarthmore, which is a very elite undergraduate place. The students are very good scholastically, but they did a course where they were doing this kind of research, and almost all of them didn't really finish it. They just had 300 pages to read for someone else, and they let that come in front. You know, there'd be like a week, and then another week where they just hadn't done anything on their own project, because no one else in the whole undergraduate curriculum was making them do a project that was just their own, where they had to get up in the morning and make sure they made space for it. I mean, maybe I could have scaffolded it more so there was just something they had to do. but I was relying on them being interested in their own ideas. I didn't stay at Swarthmore long enough to work out a solution, to work out how to play with these students who would put the 300 pages of reading for the seminar before doing their own project. But there was this sense in which it wasn't just a matter of time, it was a matter of, it was more difficult when the students had to take their own project seriously. But once they get it, and there are a number of different tools in here which include the free writing. In fact, some students just say free writing's it. That's the tool I need. If I can keep free writing, then I can get clear about what I'm doing and why. It seems a bit reductionist to think free writing can solve it all. But they would, yeah. And so I, the title grew on me, and it seemed easy to make that the title of the book. We should, yeah. So the fourth phase.
Okay. So the fourth phase is, again, it's a little bit of writing independently. So it's just a few minutes to gather your thoughts around the session, and maybe a little bit briefer in time than the free writing that we did. So maybe in 3 or 4 minutes. I'm not sure, Peter, do you think it does it have to be in the style of the free writing?
No, not at all.
Okay.
My experience in doing dialogue processes is that you might have some really interesting discussions. You finish them, you go away and you say, oh, we had this really interesting discussion. What was it we talked about though? So inserting this bit of writing, I usually end up writing 2 or 3 kind of sentences that I can then go back later and read and say, yeah, that's the things that were most important for me. So that's what we're kind of asking you to do now, to make it your own. Okay, so the 5th phase is just a quick go around, and to say, you might have written down a number of things, but just to say one thing you're taking away that you're chewing on, and to hear yourself say it will probably make it a little bit more likely you will keep chewing on it. So so one of my things, just to start us off, is I'm going to chew on the idea of a synthesis of the style and taking yourself seriously, and the foundational course, the sequence thing that Russ was pointing to. And I'll pass it to my right.
I'm chewing on something similar, because I do feel there are certain bodies of knowledge that it's our responsibility to help students engage with, but I don't want to be the person assigning them the 300 pages that diverts them from doing their projects. So that really struck an image for me. Am I the one assigning the 300 pages of boot camp style, proving yourself, immersed in the literature reading that actually takes people away from their passions of our students take themselves very seriously to come to school here. Many give up a lot of things. So how do we take them seriously back and let them do their thing so they flourish?
I was thinking about a number of things. I don't always think about tools in respect to my teaching, so I started thinking about the metaphor of tools, and tools often have a function, and so to know how to use a tool, I need to know and catalog them by what function do they use, and to know how to use a tool, I need to know how to use it properly or effectively, and I guess that's a way of fitting back into my original idea of all the other things, of how it has to fit in organically. And I actually was thinking about also 2 oppositions. We talked about openness and resistance to new tools, and I certainly want to be open. And also competence and performance. What competences do I have to be able to perform well using the tools? So those were some of my reflections.
Yeah, for me too, I found myself thinking about the context of tools and how maybe I can be a little bit more careful about placing tools in context. So I know that sometimes when I think about or say the word tools, I'm thinking about this generic toolbox. It's part of the metaphor, And, okay, you just think about the situation you're in and you look through your toolbox and pull out one that seems to be appropriate. And I noticed that some students reflect that back to me as well, so I'm thinking about maybe some more sophisticated ways of grouping the tools or thinking about tools and maybe in different terms that will let them be useful and used, but maybe not always have to come off as that sort of just generic thing that you pulled out of somewhere that doesn't have any connection to anything yet. Because I think the tools do have histories and have contexts and kind of some kind of living thing inside them too that says something about where they come in and what they mean and why they're useful. Thanks.
So that's the end of the experience of the 5-phase format, which actually, that page isn't actually in the book, it's evolved since, but it's gestured to in one part of the book. And so Jeremy actually has to go off and help set up a class, but we've got a minute more or whatever. We can stay, I can stay if you wanted to talk more about this issue about what you might do in the PhD program or anything. And if you want to spread the word to people who weren't here, there's a little flyer and it says how to order it and so on. So thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank
you.
I was glad that we could do it.